Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Underserved, the podcast for the rest of the tech industry. I'm your host, Andrew Gelina. I am joined this week by Steve Kaufer, CEO of TripAdvisor. Steve, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks very much for having me.
Thank you for making it out on a snowy day. I can't believe they canceled school for this.
Oh my God, I didn't even know that. Thrilled.
Steve, one question I often ask folks kind of right out of the gate is, why programming? What got you interested in it? What was kind of the very first thing that lit the fire when you were younger?
As a kid, I remember growing up kind of loving puzzles, loving creating stuff. If you saw my big box of Legos, I would build entire cities. And this was when Legos were literally just individual blocks that were squares or rectangles, and there was none of the fancy stuff. But it was just fun to build stuff. And so never being particularly adept with my hands in terms of mechanics or wood shop or any of that stuff. Like, hey, I could type and I could program, and funny, I could learn how to teach the computer to do things. For whatever reason, I just thought that was the coolest thing in the world, that I could do it, I could break it, I could fix it, and I could keep going. That's
cool. So you have kind of a unique experience, if you will. You tend to be a pretty humble guy, but I'll blow your horn for you a little bit. There's not a whole lot of tech CEOs who could say, I was there at the beginning and now I've grown it through tens, hundreds, thousands of people and a multi-billion-dollar company. I mean, there's like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and so forth. There must have been some inflection points and changes along the way. What was that like?
It's certainly been a blast. It's certainly been a learning experience on so many different levels. And, I've read some bios of other people. I've certainly seen how some have a vision to be a global CEO, have a vision to change the world. And yeah, I mean, as a teenager, I might have had a dream to be an inventor of sorts. I was looking to build stuff, but that was, I won't say it was in passing. It was just there. And so as I went through high school and started programming, and then in college, I'm like, this is the funnest part of college. I could actually do the stuff I enjoy doing. And then after college, it was like, as everyone would say, go see if you can get employed doing the thing that you really enjoy doing. So programming and building new programs became my interest, and that's what started First Company. And then, as you'll get into perhaps, TripAdvisor as company number 3, that ended up being a pretty big winner.
How did things kind of change over time? Did you realize, like, when you were growing Trip, when you hit 40 people or X amount in revenue, was there something that gave you pause? Like, either I need to skill up or change or learn something, or we need to pivot and change how we do things? What kind of were those points where you realized that a big change was imminent?
Yeah, so TripAdvisor had a challenging early history as we tried to get our footing and actually succeed as a company. And then once we had some success, we were still, 30, 40 people. It wasn't that big when we kind of finally clearly turned the corner. And then it was a question of what next? Could the business really scale? Could the management team, myself, the folks that had built the company, take it to the next level? And did we want to? Because we ended up selling the company to Interactive Corporation for a nice sum. So I had the ability, the whole team had the ability to go off and do something else if we had wanted to. So then it came down to, well, what are the fun parts about building a company? Because there's lots of non-fun parts every CEO will share. And what kind of company did you want it to be? And I had never really envisioned running a company with 3,000 plus people. It was challenging enough running a company with 40 or 50 people. And I had to sit down and think, like, yeah, most of the bigger companies I had seen or worked with or had friends working at, yeah, they weren't the type of company that I wanted to really be a part of. And so I kind of figured after we hit 100, 200 people, I would exit stage left and go do it all over again or go do something new. And so one of the more common questions that my friends will ask is, what do you find interesting, or why are you still at this 3,000 person company? And to dive right into the answer to that it's like I just always found that there was something brand new to learn. And there's just nothing stale about our business, the category we're in, the things we're trying to accomplish, the things we're failing at all the time that we have to redo to get it right. And because it's a company that I've been with for a while, we've been able to grow the culture in a way that I'm proud of as opposed to dismissive of, or I'm proud of. And where there are parts I don't like, as a team, we can go in and actually focus on changing that. And that's the redemption, or that's the positive sign of being there from early days. You get to build the type of company that you want to work at.
I think you told me an anecdote about a friend of yours when you were around 100 people, gave you like a anti-bureaucracy challenge and said, do you think that you could prevent this from becoming a big bureaucratic IBM?
Yeah, so that was a poignant moment in the growth of TripAdvisor, because the company was starting to become a bit more bureaucratic at 100 people. I'm like, hey, we had to follow some processes before we would buy another printer for the office or whatever it might be. And as an entrepreneur, I was just like, oh, I hate that. Wasn't interested in that. And I just saw these signs that we were becoming a big bureaucratic company. And apparently I was sharing this anecdote of having to go through processes with a friend of mine who said, hey, Steve, it sounds like you're kind of whining about it. And I'm like, well, I am. I'm not sure I'm going to stick around if the company's like this. Well, just remind me who's in charge of the company. I'm like, well, I am. Oh, so why would you let your company end up becoming that bureaucratic company you don't care for? I'm like, damn, that's a really good logical point. So, with each new process, with each new thing that we feel like we need to change in order to scale the business, I think about, all right, as an employee of one, as a member of a team of 10, as 1,000 people, is this really helping to serve the business, the type of company I want to work in, and do the benefits clearly outweigh the cons, not only from a controls, but from a cultural perspective?
Given the benefit of hindsight, is there anything you would go back and tell younger you at smaller Trip that they should do differently or mind as things grew?
Oh, yeah. I'm blessed with a ton of success at TripAdvisor, so clearly enough of the important things went right. But I do think it is really important to look back, especially when times are good, and say, hey, what could we do even better? Or what are the things that we've been doing that actually haven't been related to our success that we're proud of? Like, yes, that was a great program or a great feature or somebody likes it, but if we didn't do it, would it have mattered? To be humble and recognize the reasons why your business is successful or your product launch is successful, and not to assume because it's everything. So that the next time you do it, you can actually learn from, again, not necessarily the mistake, but learn from the experience. So I go back to the early days at TripAdvisor, and, I was reluctant to hire awesome individuals to run our HR, our people function. We needed recruiters to bring people on board, but, we didn't really need anybody of a senior and experienced level to help the company function because we were functioning just fine. And wow, I would tell myself, do not buy into that baloney. No matter how well you are functioning early on, how well you think you're functioning early on, pay really close attention to the people in the company, how well they are working together, how motivated they are, and how well suited they are to the particular jobs at hand. And are they being well prepared for the next step in their career, hopefully at TripAdvisor or whatever company, but if not, then somewhere. Point two, we were pretty good at hiring or having a high bar for hiring talent. We weren't as good as we should have been we were fine when the person that we hired turned out to be a mistake. We weren't so great at when the person we ended up hiring turned out to be okay, because the okay body was still getting stuff done. And we didn't originally have a culture of really helping that individual excel at this job or a variation of this job in the company somewhere. And so, as a engineer, as a computer science guy, like you can appreciate how if you take the right individual and make them 110% effective at what they really love to do, and take the person that was doing that, you just mix things up, you're going to get a whole lot more throughput in the company. And kind of naively, I just never paid enough attention to it because I had kind of other priorities. The people in the company aren't your top priorities all along. You're missing an opportunity. Obviously, you can still succeed, but you're missing an opportunity.
I think you're right. As you scale, like you got to figure out how can we make more people successful when they're at least semi-successful at the company. How do we coach them up, train them up, mentor them up to be able to attain everything they want and also help the company?
Yeah. And look, we found what's commonly believed in at least tech companies. There can be a few kind of like rock star engineers that can be twice as productive as somebody else, but they're relatively few and far between. You cannot build a company full of those types. It's great when you have them. You do everything you can to keep them engaged in the most exciting projects. And then you have, hopefully, a lot of really strong engineers. And how you get the medium set, the average, to be really strong, that difference in productivity for your engineering org, for any part of your org, is super. It can just drive amazing growth. It's often what distinguishes the small, nimble team that can ship something quickly from the team that used to be small and nimble and now is twice as big and, for whatever reason, has slowed down.
Now, your company has grown not just organically and through hiring folks, but also a lot of acquisitions along the way. And I believe you've said that there's kind of been a shift in how you look at acquisitions, that you started out as just like your Mexico trip origin story, a consummate bargain hunter. And how has your attitude towards acquisitions changed over time?
I've learned the bigger company calculus. When we were a smaller company, the ability to, hey, if I just had the dollars, I could fund another squad. There were plenty of people I could hire, and we could launch this ourselves. And it might take 9 months to launch it, whereas we could buy an existing company with for the purposes of illustration, I'll make up an example. I can buy a company, it already exists. They're doing $5 million in revenue. They've got a team of people, and it might cost me $20 million to buy it. Or I can build it for $1 million and be on my way to that revenue stream. Why would I ever spend $20 million in buying something that I could build for $1 million? That would be crazy. And when you're a company of 50 people, that probably is a little crazy. When you're a company of our size, the sheer effort it takes to find a new squad of individuals that can build something and sell it, like, does that come out of the existing team that are already doing everything else that's super important? And even as CEO, you have to go persuade folks to invest in this new area? Or do you fund one of your businesses to go off and add this as a bolt-on, which means they need to go hire new people because clearly everything that they're already doing is super important. So they need to go hire 5 to 10 more people. And I'm talking about a small project, but just like from the I want to do this to the job descriptions being written, to being posted, to recruiting getting active, to interviewing the first set of people, to settling on the lead who then hires the team, who then specs out the project, who then starts building it. I'm like, holy crap, I've actually elongated a time frame of many, many months before we've potentially written the first line of code to deliver on this initiative. Time is money. I've got a big audience, a big constituency already. Hey, wait a minute, there's this $5 million company over there that's already doing this thing. Not only are they up, running, effective to some degree, bolted onto our current infrastructure, hopefully can make more effective, usually on the sales side of things, and they've actually proven that the thing works. So with any new project, there's a risk that, hey, we tried it and the audience just didn't want it, no matter what the research said. Well, someone's already doing 5 million in revenue on it, there's an audience that wants it.
Someone wants it.
Somebody wants it. There's an unknown amount of my audience that might want it, but I've removed the risk factor that I can build it. I've removed the risk factor that anyone would want it. I still have the risk factor, can I double their sales or can I get the synergies I'm looking for? And I've removed the 1 to 2 year time to market wait for the product. So now all of a sudden paying $20 million for literally something I could build myself for 1 or 2 million becomes, oh, sure, I'll pay $20 million for it. That's a very easy decision because of those reasons.
It's all about time to value, and that shortens the runway and removes risk.
Removing risk, time to market, and the fact that somebody's already figured out a bunch of mistakes that I'm going to figure out on my way out the door. And hey, I get to hire the team that's already tripped a few times, and my team hasn't because I don't even have a team yet.
Underserved is brought to you by Syrinx, the developer-founded, developer-run software consulting company. Do your kids want to see you at more of their soccer games? Does your daughter want you to come to her dance recital? Does your son want you to help him with his homework, then maybe watch a show together? Of course they do. But it's getting harder and harder for you to have family time because you have to put in so many hours at the office to get your mountain of software projects completed and out the door. And you can't hire people fast enough in such a tight job market to help you catch up. If this is you, then it's time to call Syrinx. We have consultants who can slot into your team immediately to make a positive impact on your schedule. We help you ship software on time and on budget. And we help you get back time to do the important things in life, like having a life. Let us get started today. You could reach us at 888-579-7469, option 1. That number again is 888-579-7469, option 1. Or you can email us at info@syrinx.com. That is info@syrinx.com. More time with your family, brought to you by Syrinx. When I was at Monster, so they would acquire companies, they had different models. Sometimes they would fold them into Monster and say, you're all becoming monsters and you're going to sit in monster space and do monster stuff. And we're going to migrate your platform onto ours. Other times they would say, you know what, you're doing a pretty good job on your own, and or we don't want to absorb you for one reason or another. We'll just do like a little technology bridge in between us to make information flow back and forth, but you can keep running. Do you have, is that a case-by-case basis for you, or how do you guys handle that?
Yeah, absolutely case by case. So we've done literally dozens of acquisitions ranging from $1 million to a couple of $100 million. The small ones tend to be, I like the small team and I like the technology. I want to plug them into something we already have in any one of our businesses. We've bought a number of restaurant reservation companies in Europe. Well, we're not interested in your technical platform. You're coming onto our platform. Love the number of restaurants that you have signed up. Love your activity in a particular country. Your product becomes instantly better because we're adding tens of thousands of bookable restaurants to your little system. And our product globally becomes better because we now get to add the 5,000 restaurants that you brought to the table. So really easy bolt-on. Almost all the people always stay. I mean, some people wish to leave, but lots of people like to come work for that bigger, already more successful entity. And I take a bit of a portfolio approach at my level where I'm willing to acquire some companies, knowing that some, at the end of the day, the odds aren't going to work out. Obviously, never acquire a company if I think it's not going to work out, but I recognize that, look, as best as we can predict, I mean, there was one company that was relatively small. We bought half a dozen people. Literally within 9 months, there wasn't a single person left, and it just didn't work out, period, full stop. The beauty of those, at least, is that you don't spend a lot of time in due diligence, and it craters very quickly, so your opportunity cost is low. There's a different acquisition where we spent tens of millions of dollars, and it took several years for us to eventually give up on it. And that's more painful not because the money was more, but because that was several years that we had invested in growing this brand that turned out not to work.
I haven't seen a lot of coverage about the charitable work you've been involved with. You told me about very early on in the company, you wanted to kind of build something that could become a more permanent charitable arm. Could you tell us about that?
Sure. This was a really great, a really cool thing that we did early on. When the company was still small, profitable, but still small, we made an agreement with our board of directors that said we would allocate 2% of our profits into a TripAdvisor Charitable Foundation each year. And when you think from the board perspective, if you're doing a couple of $1 million in profits, it's a pretty small amount. Most companies are charitable at one level or another. The smart idea was getting it in really early. And so then as we grew, and we grew and grew, and all of a sudden it's a couple of $100 million of profit, then all of a sudden we're dropping $8 million a year into this charitable foundation. Pretty nice. Like now all of a sudden there's real money there. And then the question is, what do we want to do with it? But because it was kind of built into the infrastructure, I never had to deal with a shareholder or a constituent saying, hey, wait a minute, why are you doing this? Because they would buy into our share price knowing that that was already built into the value of the company.
How did you kind of decide where to direct the efforts for the charitable fund?
There was another kind of interesting way we thought to experiment. We started off with a idea that with modest guidelines for the charitable foundation, any employee who was active in a philanthropic effort could submit to the charity to have a grant. So imagine somebody is active in an autism foundation or something. I should back up. One of the guidelines that collectively was set was that the charities had to help those people less fortunate than ourselves. So the key words are people and less fortunate. So right or wrong, it's not a Save the Whales or other types of perfectly valid, important charities. And it wasn't any charitable organization, as in the charitable organization that wanted to do a new grass field for my wealthy suburb baseball field would not qualify because that's not really helping those less fortunate. But those afflicted by medical conditions, those there's tons that are still left to help those less fortunate than ourselves. So if you were an individual in the company and you volunteered one day a week at a foundation, then all of a sudden you could raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to apply for a $25,000 grant to the charity I work with. Charities go through a hell of a lot of effort to go fundraise $25,000. And so now here's an employee, by dint of their personal time being spent on the charity, was able to bring along a $25,000 grant. And we did that for many, many years. Turns out we had more money actually growing in the foundation than we had employees who were volunteering at various charitable organizations. So we started to also donate money to specific causes that we felt were in dire need. And then the refugee crisis came along a couple of years ago. And somewhere between, the iconic photo of the poor boy who washed up on shore, the notions of these people desperately trying to flee horrendous conditions, nothing of their own volition. They're just looking for a place to survive. And so many countries turning their backs, so many organizations inundated with requests to help. And so the TripAdvisor Foundation really stepped in with many multi-million-dollar grants in that area. And we asked our audience of travelers to help out. We've provided several opportunities to match their donations.
I think I remember seeing that on the site that up to such and such an amount, if folks that were travelers and users of your site donated, that Trip would match their donations. How much did that end up raising?
That's right. I think the first time around, we were reaching out to our community looking to raise $1 million, and we would match it. We blew past that in a relatively short period of time. I think one of the things that our partner charities, the IRC and Mercy Corps, really loved is that not only were we contributing funds, but we were raising the awareness to a whole new class of donors that weren't in their databases at all, who gave their first $50 gift, maybe because they're TripAdvisor members and we asked, maybe because they liked our match, but now they can obviously get into the path for additional fundraising for these organizations.
Does the foundation still exist? Are they still doing donations? What's going on now?
It absolutely does exist. Tens of millions of dollars in the bank, able to help still, not exclusively, but primarily focused on the refugee situation, helping both large-scale charities. We were helping with some technical assistance. Former President Obama had a council of more than a handful of private industries that had gathered to commit both people, resources, technology, product as suitable to help some aspect of the refugee situation. We were helping with mapping and logistics in an app along with Google and a couple of others to help refugees find assistance literally when they were en route on their smartphone.
Okay, so not just dollars donations, but also some enabling technology to help these folks in need?
Yeah, that was kind of the goal, both from we all want to be more involved than just writing a check. And if you can tap into the types of companies that were in the room, you actually had a number of much more concrete, sometimes much longer serving opportunities. It wasn't relevant for TripAdvisor, but, Marriott as one company was saying, hey, we'll take in quite a few refugees across the world and train them in their very first job in hospitality, because it's a relatively low-skill job. It's often where a number of the refugees happen to be at that moment in time, but it's gainful employment. And then, hey, look, in any job after you get your first job, if you work hard, if you are in an industry that is growing, you usually have lots of opportunity.
We've covered a few topics here, including how to get involved with charities that we've spoken about. We will have some links in the show notes, and those show notes you can get to at underserved.libsyn.com. Again, that's underserved.libsyn.com. We'll also have a link there for our email address where you can give us feedback, or if you're interested in being on the show, that email address is underserved@syrinx.com. That's underserved@syrinx.com. I come from an engineering background, and when I got thrust into a leadership position at a company, there was an awful lot of things I had to do that were not really on my competency list. Like I had to figure out like HR and PR and recruiting and selling. Is there any lesson you learned in one of those maybe initially uncomfortable areas, or anything that was taught to you along the way that you remember?
Oh, God, yeah. I mean, there's so many fun stories as you learn new things and fail and try again. One of the most memorable moments was, way back a few years at a prior company where we had built this great software and we needed it, or a potential client wanted it ported to another system. I thought to myself and my teammates, how the heck do we price this? And I'm like, well, let's figure out how much it's going to cost us to actually do the work. I don't remember the exact numbers, but let's say that cost us $10,000 to do the work. I'm like, all right, well, do we want to make a 10% profit margin on it? And I'm like, oh, it's 20 too greedy, 20%. I don't know. We wanted to do the port anyway, so it wasn't like going off field or off strategy, but it wasn't on our priority list now. So I reached out to a friend for negotiation advice, having literally never done this before in my life. He said, use the mirror test. I'm like, hey, Paul, what's the mirror test? I'm not familiar with that one. Oh, let me tell you. It works all the time. Stand up in front of the mirror and pretend you're talking to whoever you're negotiating with, and pretend they just asked you, how much would this effort be, and say a number. And if you say a number and you keep a straight face, you did not say a high enough number. And keep going up, up, up until you can't actually say it with a straight face. And I was like, all right, this is going to cost me $10,000 to do it. I went in front of the mirror. I'm like, all right, 15,000. I could say that. I didn't blink. I got up to about 28, 29,000. I blinked at 30, and so I couldn't charge 30. But I think I ended up going in with 25,000. And mind you, it cost 10. The teammates and I were debating, should it be 11,000 or 12,000? I went in at 25 and the client said, all right, that sounds reasonable.
Maybe you left something on the
yeah,
table.
It's like, wow, I need to be a little more confident in my mirror test, but thank God for that. When you run across the things that just don't have a comparable and your client wants something that you have, it's unclear what their other options are. Everyone always has other options, but if it's unclear to you, go with what you can articulate with a straight face.
And I think it kind of ties back to what you were talking about before, where when you're talking about acquisitions, you said it's about time to value. Your customer was probably looking at it that way. They probably said, 25 grand sounds great. We can get this done. We don't have anyone in-house to do it. It fixes a huge problem.
You bet. And hey, with hindsight, and I'm now definitely older and perhaps a little bit wiser, right, that might have been 75,000 at the time, but live and learn.
You did well and you did better than you thought you were going to at the outset.
Exactly.
Saw in your bio you have a few interesting hobbies, one of which I believe you got involved in fencing at a young age.
Why, yes, indeed.
How'd you get started and what got you into it?
I don't know whether it was a couple of the old Three Musketeer movies, but it just seemed like a blast to run around with a stick in your hand. And when you could actually do that and have it be called a sport, that seemed like, wow, I would want to try that. And it so happens my family moved. We were in a new area. There was a fencing club nearby. And so I literally just dropped in to say, what's this about? Very odd group, but a very welcoming group. And then I learned that fencing, while there's clearly a physical, you need to practice, there was a pretty big mental game involved in terms of trying to predict what your opponent was going to do in any particular time. And I really loved that aspect of it. So yeah, that was from high school all the way through college and an occasional fencing adventure after that.
You're trying to predict what your opponent's doing. Is it because the strategy is to counterpunch, or what are you thinking ahead on there?
Sure. You basically imagine, look, if I fake in this direction, what's their likely move? How can I detect it, avoid it quickly enough? They're probably predicting I'm going to avoid it. So is there a way I can stay one step ahead and score the point? And so I had thought of it as you just need to be faster, or you just need to have better point control, making sure you hit your opponent 100% of the time. And that's clearly part of the game. But I watched a ton of fencers, and I lost myself quite a few bouts where I might have been executing everything fine, but somebody else had outthought me.
Sounds like chess with a sword.
It has been referred to chess with a sword. The shout out I'll give is it's just such a great cast of characters. For whatever reason, fencing attracts a bunch of, and I put myself in this camp, excited, somewhat eccentric type of individuals. And yeah, it's tough to find it on television, but it's an absolute blast at pretty much any age.
That's cool. Well, Steve, thank you very much for making it out today to join us. I'm sure folks are going to appreciate the lessons learned and stories you had for Underserved.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Well, hopefully we'll have you on again real soon, and we'll see you around town. Thanks for joining us.
Wonderful. Thanks, Andrew.